One of these days, Baylor basketball will play in a game that doesn't come down to one possession. And hopefully they win it. But it wasn't that way Saturday. Let's do a recap. This is Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I think we're tired of losing one possession games.
Yes, thank you for joining another episode of Locked On Baylor, brought to you by FanDuel. I'm your host, Cam Stewart, and like Scott Drew said there, and like most of us are feeling, we are tired of losing one possession games. It hasn't been fun the last 3 games out for Baylor, and in this conference, it's one of those where you say, man, 3 losses, like almost out of the jump. Three of the first 6 are losses, 3 in a row at this point, where you're like, man, those are missed opportunities because of how good this conference is. When the differences, the margins are so fine, it stinks to see it not go your way. Thank you for making Locked On Baylor your first listen today and every day. Of course, a triple overtime loss to the TCU Horned Frogs on Saturday. Both teams, but especially Baylor, had plenty of chances to win this game, and it fell through their fingers. Baylor was up 10 at the under 12 timeout in the second half and let the thing go into overtime, and probably should have lost it in the first overtime. Obviously, Jacoby Walter hits the great shot. I wouldn't call it a miracle shot because he's a shooter. Does a brilliant shot fake, step aside, wide open 3, bang, place goes nuts. One of the great moments I've had around Baylor basketball, singular moment anyway. That was pretty fun. Baylor also has the ball in their hands at the end of double overtime with 18 seconds left, and obviously a tie game because it went to a third overtime. They did not score then, and then had a 5-point lead, if I'm not mistaken, maybe a 4-point lead, which is a lot in this game, in triple overtime. And once again, could not finish, dropped to 3-3 in the conference. And it was a frustrating day. It was another frustrating day. Baylor had so many chances to win the game. And what's kind of funny is, if you'll remember the last play before halftime, it was a brilliant look for an Yves Missi layup. I was there at the game with my girlfriend, and I told her, Baylor got the ball with like 12 seconds left or whatever it was. And I said, they never, ever, ever get a good shot at the end of the half. And then they give it to Yves Missi in the cylinder. Nobody's with him, and he gets a layup. And I was like, well, except for that time. And then it came back. Double overtime, 18 seconds left, coming out of a timeout. Baylor gets the ball. RayJ Dennis is the only player on Baylor to touch the ball in that possession. Misses a fadeaway jumper. I couldn't understand it. I was screaming in the stands. Why can't we run a set? Why can't we draw something up one time? Yada. And I've said it in the post game. I've said it the last 2 weeks here when they started losing all these games. And Matt Mosley asked Scott Drew about that after the game. And here's what Coach Drew had to say about that possession.
We ran the same play, and they were having trouble stopping it. We had some really good looks from there, but we were hoping to get a pull and kick, and it was the same ball screen action that RayJ had been so effective on.
Now I'm going to give Coach Drew benefit of the doubt here. I mean, not that it's a bad thing, but he did say at the beginning of that, it's like they all kind of run together. He was hoping that he did have the right possession that he was talking about. It sounds like he did, and that Baylor just didn't get the look. So it was a play designed essentially for RayJ Dennis, kind of like an RPO in football is what I was getting out of it. A pass shoot option. And they did run a couple screens, and TCU just didn't bite. TCU didn't leave their man, and he couldn't get a shooter like a Langston Love or a Jacoby Walter open on the wing. So he decided to take the shot himself. Does get some separation, but that's not really his shot, and it's not a high percentage shot any way you cut it. So that was the most frustrating possession of the game for me, because I'm sure I'm not the only fan who thinks like this, but when the game goes to even one overtime, but you had the chance in regulation, you're like, gosh, I don't like leaving that on the table. It seems like, I don't know what the percentages are, but when you're a fan, it seems like when it's your team that does that, you never end up winning. And I thought Baylor left it on the table twice, especially with that second possession. But where they really left it on the table is in regulation. Up 10 at the under 12 timeout. And I was tweeting about it. So they were up 10 at the end of 12, at the under 12. At the under 8, they were still up 8. And you were like, okay, they didn't win that media, but you still got some cushion. Now is the time to push. Don't let them win another media. And 2.5 minutes later, before they even had a chance, another media timeout, TCU had cut the lead to 1. And they were getting anything they wanted on the offensive end. So once again, it is a struggle down the stretch. We saw it against Kansas State. We really saw it against UT in the game before. And even after a week off, they really struggled to execute down the stretch again. Now, the offense was better, but the other end of the court was not. And here's what Scott Drew had to say about his team's performance at the end of the second half.
Well, I mean, it's a game on two ends of the court, and we can be good on the offense and struggle on the defense. We can be good on the defense, struggle on the offense, and we can be good on the glass and then struggle on the glass. And at the end of the day, you got to be good in every area if you're not going to have a one-possession game. And in a one-possession game, anything can happen. And I mean, Coach Dixon, he's a great coach, great program. They have a third most experienced team, and I think it shows. And I think we got a talented team, but we're going through the fire first time, a lot of them, and sometimes you got to get burned to learn. And I tell you, it's hard losing. You put as much in it as everybody puts in it, and to have close losses, I mean that's hard.
So yeah, I mean he hit it exactly right. I mean, if it's not one thing, it's the other right now for these Baylor Bears, and it just hasn't seemed to all click together yet. Whereas, was one field goal in the last 8 minutes against UT. This time they were really having trouble stopping TCU. I talked about that under 8. I think both teams were in about the 60s, and we go to overtime, low 60s, like 61-60, something like that. And by the end of regulation, it's 76-76. I do like kind of how Scott put that. It wasn't making any excuses, but just saying, it's not fully clicking right now for us. Not that, again, not as an excuse thing, but like we're getting there kind of thing. And that's something I'm going to talk about here in the next segment about just how this looks going forward for Baylor. Because, obviously with this league, it just doesn't get any easier. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into power, speed, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride. Yeah, I know. It makes a lot of sense. Every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're trying to burn rubber. You're not burning cash. Okay, with all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP or the Wooden Award winner and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions do apply. eBay guaranteed fit only available to our customers in the US of A. And so I talk about kind of this look ahead. I don't want to dwell on this loss too much. And this is not supposed to be an excuse here, but or trying to sugarcoat it at all, I guess is a better way to put it. But things are getting better. And I hate even saying that after 3 straight losses because this team is good enough that they probably shouldn't have 3 straight losses, at least in any other conference, I should say. But like things looked just bleak after that Kansas State game. It was like, do we have to rethink what this team is? And I would say even it was looked bleak after Texas. But I looked down the box score. I did this in the post game. And there's nothing that Baylor just got dominated in. It's one of those games that you just can't gauge how they lost it by looking at the stat sheet. It was defensive execution down the stretch in the second half, I think, is what really, really did it. And Scott didn't go into too much detail on that, but they were forcing TCU into tough shots for the first 30, 32 minutes of that game. And then it just looked like they wore down. TCU was able to back guys down in the paint and get a lot of layups in those last 8 minutes of the game where they really cut into the lead and cut it from 8-1 in a 2.5 minute span that really tipped the game on its head. And so these things are still fixable, but I also understand why people are frustrated that I've said that for 3 straight games and they've all been losses, right? They're not usually problems, fixable or not, that great teams have to deal with by January 29th at the time you're listening to this, and 6 games into the conference schedule after having a decent, not great, non-conference schedule, but a non-conference schedule where you faced a couple of good teams. So there are things getting better, sure. I think the consistency they've gotten out of Langston Love has been tremendous. You got it at times last year, but it wasn't always consistent. He's been terrific for you this year. And he was gutting it out every possession of that game. You do have a true point guard in RayJ Dennis, who I talked about in the post game, but just ran out of gas. And I felt for him more than I usually feel for players. But he really gave it his all out there. But he had to play 50 plus minutes of basketball in that game. And Coach Drew talked about it after the game, but he played terrific defense from minute 1 to 55 in that game, and started to get a little loose in that third overtime. But it was just because he was dog tired, man. I mean, he had to really dig deep to even stay out there and be effective. And he still gave you baskets in that third overtime, 24 and 10 on the game. I thought he was terrifically efficient through the first 5 halves/quarters of the game. When you got to that 4, and that 5th one was a little tough. But I thought he really gave you a lot. And I think what exemplifies kind of how we were all feeling after that game is how Scott Drew actually opened the press conference. Here is what he had to say about that.
Well, 3 buzzer beaters in a row really puts you in a great mood. So first I want to apologize to the Baylor fans, because that's tough to cheer for a team 3 straight times and lose. It's harder to coach it, and I know our players feel like crap. Worked really hard to try to be better in game-ending situations. I think we've shown some improvement. Our free throw shooting is better, but not good enough. Our rebounding, we needed one more to win that second chance battle. We'd done pretty good throughout the game, and then in the late in the game and overtimes, credit TCU for coming up with some key offensive rebounds and making some key plays down the stretch. I thought when Jacoby hit the 3, we were really there, and after that, just didn't close it out. So crowd was awesome and gave us a great opportunity, a great chance, and so many close plays that lead to winning or losing. And I know it just takes a spark to start a fire, and we're at that point. We need to get a win and get some confidence going.
Yeah, anytime Scott Drew is apologizing after a heartbreaking loss to the Baylor fans, that hits, man. That hurts. It hurts, because he's the most genuine guy we all know, and that was a really genuine way to open things. That was not answering a question. That was him coming to the microphone and as quickly as possible trying to tell us all that. And it just stinks, because I know there are times with some of our favorite teams, whether it be college or the pros, where things aren't going right and you just see a lack of effort out there. And it sucks. It sucks when you, the fan, are thinking, we care more about this than the players or even sometimes the coaches do. We know at the end of the day, a lot of times that isn't really the case. And with this Baylor basketball team, that is certainly not the case. The losses that have come in these last 3 games have not been from a lack of effort whatsoever. And I talked about earlier in this segment about how things are getting better in certain departments. That is a great sign that the effort is there, because they are improving on the things that have lost them games the last couple of weeks. And it's my sincere hope, of course, and all of our hopes, that better late than never, but deep into the season, that turns this thing around, that they are battle tested and ready for everything. Because right now they're battle tested, but not in the good way, because they aren't pulling through in these close games, right? They did against Cincinnati, but they haven't in the 3 games since. So all that to say, I mean, I think we can all be on the same page about that. You can disagree on what the problems are with this team, but what you can't disagree on is that they are giving a maximum effort and they are making adjustments. That no guys are taking plays off here. Maybe there's a focus thing that you don't like about the game, last second shots or last second opportunities or execution down the stretch. That is a focus thing with this team, or some little adjustments, if anything. It's not an effort thing. And that is somewhat refreshing. That should be what gives you hope the rest of the season, is they are really good players with really good coaches, and they're giving the maximum effort. It's just a few things they need to tweak. And that's really how Scott Drew ended that soundbite of it just takes a spark to start a fire. And we're seeing the glimpses of it. You're hitting your stone or whatever to start the fire for the camp out, and you're starting to see the flare, but you just don't have that spark yet. They're getting there. And I know, I hear you barking, big dog. I don't like saying that on January 29th either. But there's plenty of season left here. And you're about to go into a real murderer's row of games. Your next 5, only one of them is not against a ranked team, and that's your next game, which is in Orlando against UCF, which is no cakewalk either. They'll get there. I don't know if that means Final Four. I don't know if that means national championship, like I thought earlier this year. But they will get there. And I truly believe that by looking at the numbers, A, seeing the effort they put out there on Saturday, even a loss, B, and not only the fact that Scott Drew was saying that after the game, but the fact that Scott Drew is our coach. I trust the guy. I trust his staff. And you've known, if you listen to the show, I don't think his last couple of games have been spotless by any means. But I trust the heck out of him. And this team, they're close to getting that spark. We are close to having better days again. And I'm going to talk more about that later this week. About this coaching staff, what it looks like going forward in terms of this season, and highlighting some of the dogs that we had out there on Saturday. RayJ Dennis, of course, but Yves Missi having a career day. I haven't even talked about him yet. He's probably going to get a whole episode this week. We'll see, depending on how the day is playing out, and the impact that Langston Love has given them has just been absolutely incredible. But the women did bounce back. We're going to talk about them after this. But first, I got to tell you about my friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and a proud sponsor of Locked On Baylor and the Locked On Podcast Network. Guys, we're here. It's Super Bowl time. The Chiefs going back again against the champions of the NFC. Maybe you can guess at around what time I recorded this show yesterday. But if you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about the best seat on the couch, grabbing that favorite snacks, and placing some super bets. Okay, I love the prop bets that come with the Super Bowl. Over under on the national anthem. Who's going to be the guest appearance in the halftime show? What color Gatorade it's going to be? Oh yeah, and anytime touchdown, Super Bowl MVP, all that stuff too. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W or 2 or 3. Not only can you place a win on who will win the Super Bowl, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and yes, what color the Gatorade will be, so much more. New customers join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets with your first bet of $5 or more wins. We talked about 150 for weeks. Now it's $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. We go into Super Bowl 2 weeks here. It's going to be all about the NFL. And one team that didn't get the L. Great segue. This weekend was your Baylor, for the artists formerly known as the Lady Bears. They go into Stillwater. They get a kind of convincing win. Certainly after the first quarter, a convincing win, 72-60 over the Cowgirls of Oklahoma State and a lot of people's favorite coach in the Big 12. Mine is Nikki Collin, though. Mine is Nikki Collin. And, they didn't win by 30 or anything, but I was really impressed with the things that went right for them in this game. Because you talk about 3 straight losses for the men, but that was 3 out of 4 losses for the women. Starting with that just disaster up in Lawrence a few weeks ago. So they were slipping big time. And they came back in a convincing way yesterday in Stillwater against Oklahoma State. They were down 7 going into. They turned that around big to actually have a lead at halftime after being down 7 in that first quarter. And it was a couple individual performances that really put a smile on my face, I'll say, for the Lady Bears turning it around. First one, Dariana Little Page Bugs, man. I was just so distraught after that kick out she had at the end of the game in the last minute against Kansas State. I went over it a few times because I'm such a huge fan of her game. And she had a good look at the basket, instead kicked it out for a 3. And that's just a microcosm of what they were doing down the stretch against Kansas State. But she played much better in this one. 11 points, 4 rebounds. She was scoreless in that game against the Wildcats. So much better. Trey Edwards was filling up the stat sheet for the first time in a couple of games. Obviously, she can make her impact in a couple of different ways. But this was kind of the vintage, I'm going to kind of put the team on my back a little bit, Trey Edwards game. Where she goes for 16 and 6 in this one. Bella Fauntleroy, again, kind of a energizer bunny for the team. I mean, she in their big wins this year, she has kind of pulled them up by their bootstraps a couple of times, and she certainly sparked some runs in this game. She had 15 on 4 of 7 shooting, and to have 15 and 8. To have 15 and 8 from Bella Fauntleroy, you can't ask for much more than that. To provide you that off the bench is just terrific. But I'm bearing the lead here because the biggest number in this stat rundown, Aijha Blackwell, 19 boards, 19. Whoo! That is Brittany Griner, Kalani Brown, Lauren Cox kind of stuff. 19 boards. And by the way, that was the biggest statistical difference Baylor had in the game. They were plus 16 on Oklahoma State on rebounds and 11-5 in second chance points. There's half the deficit right there. They won by 12. There's a plus 6 right there. I also loved the ball movement that kind of got back into their game, 17 assists. And the bench points, thanks a lot to Bella Fauntleroy on this one, 27-4. They outscored Oklahoma State's bench. So love that. Love that from the Lady Bears. They needed this win, kind of a gut check win, so to speak, where they were kind of thrown down again, but they came back, bounced back pretty quickly, and was not going to accept the defeat again, which is really the feeling that I got early on in this game, that they were done with that, wiped their hands of it, went forward, had a great game and a really nice win. They will be back at the Foster Pavilion this Thursday night, and boy, howdy, is this going to be a good one. Baylor against Texas, 7:30 Thursday night. Be there, guys. I'll talk about it during the week, but be there. That is going to be the place to be. Let's make an awesome environment. Let's get a sweep over UT to send them off into the SEC. I know I'll love it. Let me know what you think about that game down in the comments below. Any comment helps. Be sure to like and subscribe. Tell your friends about it. What do you think's going wrong with the men's team too? Are you as confident? I mean, again, I'm not saying like, hey, they're still going to the Final Four. Don't worry. There are definitely some problems here, but I'm confident they can turn this around. How about you? I'd love to know what you think. And what is the lens that you view this team through now? Anyway, we'll be back tomorrow talking more basketball. We're going to mix in a little football this week too. Thank you for making it your first listen today and every day. This is Locked On Baylor.